Hello everyone, here we are again. This is the second Obsidian walkthrough that we created based on quite a lot of cool feedback. Like, thank you so much for all the feedback, first of all. But based on that, we started thinking, talking obviously on what to include in the new walkthrough that I would create. And the idea I came up with is to walk you through what I personally call templated thinking, kind of. It's a way to use templates, in this case in Obsidian, to aid yourself in making decisions, in thinking through things, whatever it is, reflections, all of these things. As you saw in the last video, I'm quite a fan of using templates. I'm quite a fan of using a very structured approach, at least trying to do such a thing. And I was also quite keen on walking you through kind of a couple of tricks to make the usage of Obsidian, or rather a second brain, a consistent part of your life, right? So you can be maybe swayed to start this whole second brain thing simply because it's fun to get the feeling of productivity and trying to set something up like this. But in the end, it is really not paying off if you can't use it in daily life. And it's something that I'm very prone to like over invest in productivity and then have the feeling that I'm productive by investing in productivity kind of tricks and tools and all these things. But really, in the end, I'm not actually getting closer to my other goals. And trying to be more productive and investing time in that is in itself not really a goal. It's rather something that should aid you in reaching your goals. And as such, a second brain should do exactly that, right? So I was keen on walking you through just a couple of things that I do to make that simpler. And I'm going to start there, and then I'm going to go through a few of the templates that I use and the way that I use them in. And including some plugins, because these templates are based on a few plugins that I kind of combine to make things easier. But let's start off with integrating a second brain into your life. In the last walkthrough, I also went through some of the tools that I use to make it slightly easier to put things into my second brain. Some of the questions I got from people online and offline is, well, I am not that great in consistently making a lot of notes, but I do have a lot of ideas that I want to capture. And this quick capturing is what I use the inbox for. It's also mentioned in the previous walkthrough that I did. And I think you can use a separate app for this. I think it's quite common to do this. I personally use Todoist, but you can also use maybe Trello, or I would not recommend Notion because the startup time is very slow. But for my quick captures, I actually also use IA Writer a lot. IA Writer is an app that you can use for markdown editing. So in my case, my whole second brain, all my files and notes and such are synced to cloud storage. And this cloud storage then is set up on my iPhone as well. And this allows me to easily have back and forth sync between all devices that I own. I am only on iOS devices or macOS devices, which makes it quite simple because I can use the same structure in most cases. Because, for example, Android, I know this is quite a lot more difficult to have this cloud sync. You can set it up, but it's just more painful. So if you are also an Apple user, then this is going to be a lot easier. I personally like IA Writer. I also tried OneWriter, but I prefer the user interface of IA Writer. So you can do quick capturing that way. You can just open your inbox, create a new note, and then later actually maybe change it a little bit, make it a bit more structured, and then put it into your second brain in the right place. And I think that's really the most important point to make it a consistent part of your life. What I see happening a lot is that you have a second brain, but the threshold for working in your second brain, right, so for organizing it or thinking with it, is just too high. You have to sit behind your computer, you need to have a few minutes on your own, and it's not uncommon to not have that time at all. But when you actually kind of have open tasks, like these quick capture ideas that you maybe still want to walk through, or you still want to improve upon, or you want to think about, well, this is actually a really kind of cue for you to work on it later. And I think these kind of things, so you put something into your second brain that you later still have to work on. And I think the more you can do these things, it will help you integrate it into your life. And for me, that's quick capturing. It's reflections, because I enjoy reflecting as well, at least the results of reflections. I enjoy that. I also enjoy kind of organizing information, mapping knowledge, because sometimes I'm slightly overwhelmed by the amount of information I have to process to satisfy my own passions and interests. So those are kind of typical areas for me personally that I choose to make simpler, and the means I do that by is reflections, quick capturing, and Zettelkasten and such. So that's kind of my overall recommendation is if you are still on your second brain journey, maybe you're so very far in and you just think this is interesting, or you think there's some room for improvement in that area, then I would try to focus on the friction that you experience in putting things into your second brain, and second, the friction you experience while trying to use your second brain in daily life. So one of the questions I also ask myself in my reflection is, did I actually improve my thinking with the second brain? And that makes me very aware of when I actually do. And then it allows me, simply because I just stated that I want that, right? So it will allow me to then realize like, hey, I just used my second brain to do something great. Maybe I should, I don't know, expand on this or make it slightly easier for myself, right? So you're kind of building your own product. It's really like you're building your own product without doing any coding. And for a good example of this is whenever I get an email, someone sends me an article, and I've recently read another article of the same topic, but I forgot some of the details. Well, I can quickly go into my second brain, capture some of the details that I did make notes of, and then send that as a response. And then the other person that I maybe work with or a friend, well, he or she then has some new interesting information. I have an article that I can link to that I still have very, properly organized, I hope at least, in my second brain. That's a typical use case that I really enjoy. On the other hand, for example, I work a lot with architecture. So I make notes of all the architectures that I work with, like from a system or software perspective. And it's quite easy to forget some of the details there. So I'll walk through the architecture at a later point when I have to go back into a certain project, or I'll have like a flow chart of how this piece of software works. And I go back and I see exactly how it works. And this helps me be way more efficient. And, personal documentation is really quite great, especially in the world of software development. I think it's nice to have READMEs that are shared with everyone, but then you also have a strong responsibility to keep these READMEs or documentation in general, to keep this up to date. So that's why I choose in many cases to keep the documentation to myself, so that if something is not completely correct, I'm completely aware because I was the one that initially wrote it. And if you have to read someone else's documentation, you're very reliant on everything being complete. So that's why I think a second brain is perfect for documentation in your own work environment. Some people choose not to use their second brain for work too much. I personally actually use it for work a lot, and I really like it. So then let's get into the templated thinking. I haven't actually heard of this concept before. I think a lot of people do something along these lines, but I'm definitely keen on trying to walk you through the way I personally like to approach it. And I know that Niels does a lot of this as well. He actually set up most of the Notion templates that we use for the organization of the Systematic Mastery podcast nowadays, which, by the way, I'm not reviewing often enough because I don't really like the friction of Notion, because I was just talking about friction, right? Like Notion for me is just the last few months has been increasingly frictionful, and Obsidian has reduced the friction overall, also because it's pretty cool. Like while optimizing Obsidian, it becomes more efficient. And I think with Notion, what I noticed while optimizing Notion over the months, it became less efficient for me simply because it got bloated. And I don't have this problem with Obsidian just yet. All right, so let me walk you through the first example that I have, and that is, well, in structure-wise, I think you can, if you've seen the previous walkthrough, I would recommend you to watch that one before you go into this one. But I have a resources folder. So resources is the R in para. Para is P-A-R-A. It's an abbreviation for kind of areas you want to divide your kind of information in, your digital information in all tools. So the template I would like to show first is the daily note template. And I think this is also one of the coolest or like more complicated integrated ones. This is what my daily note template looks like. And it doesn't say a lot right now, but the cool thing is, I'll walk you through it line by line, is that it's quite linked to the way I use my second brain overall. So I have a kind of, I do this a lot. I have a main note. In this case, it's a daily note. But for example, when I create a project, I have a project folder. And then in that project folder, I have a note named after the project. And I link all project-related notes to that main note whenever I can, so that in my graph view, I get a pretty like efficient overview and organization of how this whole thing was developed, because I'll have dates in my notes as well. Anyways, so this will, in the graph view, show me all my daily notes. So let's go here, and I'll open this in a separate view. And then when we show the local graph, then we see, for example, all the daily notes I've created so far. It's not a lot yet, but because this system is actually quite new. So I've been doing daily notes for quite a while, but in this specific structure, it's relatively new, and I really like it so far. So I can see all my daily notes in this overview. That's quite neat. So then the second line, I'll go back to the actual editing mode. The second line is when. Well, you can see that this is not the typical part of a template. That's because it's actually relying on a plugin. The plugin I'm relying on in this case is Templater. It's already open here. Templater is actually a really cool plugin. I can show you the description of it. So the Templater Obsidian plugin allows you to use kind of macros or like functions that are way more advanced than the default options that Obsidian gives you out of the box. Actually, it also allows you to do custom scripting. I haven't actually done this yet, but you should definitely check this plugin out, read through the documentation, and see if it works for you. It took a little bit of time for me to set it up in a way that I like to make it very frictionless. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth looking into. So the thing is, I combine this Templater plugin together with a core plugin that's called the Daily Note plugin. Let me look that up. Here it is, Daily Note plugin. I have that enabled. And in my Daily Notes plugin settings, I actually have the template set to my Daily Note template. And whenever I create my Daily Note, Templater will walk through the template and it will execute like all these kind of macros. So then when you look here, TP date will actually become the current date. TP yesterday is yesterday, and TP date F. This actually will map to the current week number, and I'll show you why I'm doing that in a bit. One important thing I also should mention is, just for convenience, I think hotkeys really is worth looking into in Obsidian and optimizing for yourself. So open today's node in my case is Command T. So I'm a heavy shortcut user. I may make actually a walkthrough of that as well. There's a tool called Hammerspoon where you can script your own, well, anything basically, and create keyboard shortcuts for yourself. So I basically never navigate through apps with my mouse. I just only use my keyboard. I think in general, that's a nice way to make things more frictionless for yourself. So follow-up line is Workbench, actually also a plugin. It's the Workbench plugin, not surprisingly. The Workbench plugin is also extremely convenient. It's just a way for you to, well, you have just one node, that's your Workbench, and in any situation you can add something to your Workbench. It's kind of a running node that you can use to keep track of the things that you've maybe changed or you've touched, or projects that you're working on currently, because at some point I have this problem. Definitely you lose overview of all the things that you're working on, or that might be WIP. WIP stands for work in progress, sorry. So when something's work in progress, at some point you'll probably want to find it back after you've forgotten it. And I easily forget that it's actually work in progress. So that's why I use the Workbench. So I show or link my Workbench in my daily note. So I'm also prompted to then check out like all the things that I haven't really looked into for a bit, and makes it very efficient to kind of actually finish stuff instead of touching it and leaving it unfinished. And that's kind of a thing that I've reflected on, that is a problem I sometimes have, or more than sometimes, to be honest. So then I have a short minor reflection piece. You know, if I'm feeling anything, I'll write it down. It's a nice prompt for myself. I don't use it that often. I think half of the time I use it, and it usually is 1 or 2 sentences. It's nothing too complicated, but it definitely helps to increase self-awareness. And as mentioned in one of our podcasts, self-awareness is actually also by research related to the increase of self-regulation. And that's also something you notice in teams, by the way. Like, the more aware you are of certain challenges or positive things of anything, really, the higher the chance that you'll be able to regulate something around that. It's hard to like put into words exactly the kind of variables that you're optimizing in that case, but Um, I also, just from experience, can say that having this small reflection every single day helps a lot just for the minor awareness of like, oh, I'm a little bit tired, or oh, I'm a little bit stressed, etc., etc. Some people are already very intuitive in this case. I'm personally not, so I need prompts for this. Right, so then productivity plan, it's very simple, just a task with an estimate of the amount of Pomodoros it would cost me. So it's based on Pomodoro technique. I don't work in Pomodoro technique that often. I think I use 1 or 2 or 3 Pomodoros a day. But in other cases, I'll just forget to set a timer and actually work on the task, which is also quite great, right? I mean, you don't really always have to set a timer. But I will still do estimations in Pomodoros. So in this case, if I enter 4 as an estimate, I will actually estimate 2 hours to work on it. And it's quite convenient because if you assume that you fill in a 1 and it's 1 hour, then it's quite difficult if you have tasks that only take half an hour. I personally never plan less than half an hour for tasks, and that's one of the reasons Pomodoros work very nicely in time estimations. But then obviously the task description, whether it's done. I also do flow rate and engagement rate. I usually do this end of day. Sometimes I'm noticing it right after the task and I'll just fill it in. But it gives, again, awareness, a good overview of how a certain type of work or task brings me into a good flow state. And also how engaged I am. So how energetic or enthusiastic I am while doing it. This is based on the book Designing Your Life. It's actually very much related to the next point. But before I go to the next point, I'm going to actually create this daily note. So I'm going to do Command T and then I will create my daily note. And here we are. Very fast, very low friction. And today I have a new note. It's linked anywhere I really want it to be linked to. And I can render it, and here we go. This is the complete overview. I personally like to have like the full width of my screen for my notes. It looks a little bit ugly, but it definitely is a more efficient use of the space in here. Right, so you can see that this is my workbench. It's rendered here. These are some of the notes that I've recently created and haven't actually completed, I think. I remember, actually, this is the first time I've been checking it in a few days, so I remember most of these topics that I actually still have to finish, and I was working in these notes for a bit. So, productivity plan for today, it's not there yet because it's actually middle of the night, so I'm going to end the day soon, and then tomorrow going to fill this in. The AEIOU log, I'm not going to go into exactly what this is. You can put the screen on pause and read the explanation. It's also a concept from Designing Your Life. I think you'll find it if you Google AEIOU Designing Your Life, and then they have some articles about this. Basically, it stands for activities, environments, interactions, objects, and users, and it's a way to grade certain activities. I'm not intending to grade all my tasks, but for example, I just put an example here and you can give a rating to it and you can describe the activity and kind of your environment, and it makes you very aware of what works for you and makes you happy. And I think doing this on a continuous basis allows you to kind of optimize towards what really engages you optimally, and it helps you make better decisions because it comes from higher self-understanding in that case. I also have an energy log. So what the energy log allows me to do is, well, basically track some of the stats that I'm interested in. I used to do this with habit tracking, but I noticed that with habit tracking, it was kind of annoying that I couldn't really track my fasting time. And I kind of like the table layout. So I'm still working on kind of reiterating over the way I do habit tracking. I moved a lot of my habits to weekly checks instead of daily checks. And it helps because I can include that in my weekly reflection. So in this case, I'll just include my fasting time. I also have a link to today's note, my energy throughout the day, my focus throughout the day. In this case, it was no focus. I think I just forgot to enter it. My hunger while fasting, the amount of coffees I had, whether I meditated, I did a workout, and my overall deep work score. As you can see, I'm not extremely strict on this. Any information that I can give myself, the better. I think overall my success rate is around 60-70% of this, and it definitely already helps. So it's good enough. It's continual improvement there. And I also have a to-do list. So I'm still experimenting with this. So like work-related stuff in Notion, which is more like company-wide, and then there's personal stuff in Todoist. But yeah, it's also quite nice to have kind of to-dos in your notes, right? So I want to expand on a particular topic, or I want to still write about something, then I can create a to-do tag and I'll be prompted to think or work on those at a later point. Right, so that's the today's note. I think this is actually one of the most powerful recent developments I've been able to set up in Obsidian. Before we move on, let me show you the advantage of having your notes linked in this particular way. So I have my weekly note, and this is actually my reflection. And the cool thing about this is, while going through my weekly reflection at the end of the week, I can open a local graph and I can go through my days of the week. So this week I actually didn't create all the daily notes yet. But for example, when I go to the daily note I just created, which I will actually expand on tomorrow morning, this allows me to go through, okay, so this is what my day looked like, etc. And then from that point on, I can actually go back to my week and continue my weekly reflection. So again, this is kind of the way you can make the way Obsidian works for yourself quite efficient. And again, it's very personal. If this does not work for you, I'm really keen on learning what does, and maybe you can leave a description of that in the comments. So then moving on to the next topic that I would like to discuss. I'm going to drag myself over here for a bit. Boom. And then we can go through the next one, and that is a postmortem. The postmortem is something that comes from the development world a little bit. I think if you're in tech, it's probably something that you've done sometime or heard of. Postmortem is actually nothing more than a reflection after a bad event or a mistake. It's not blameful if you do it in a team setting, but also it shouldn't be full with blame if you do it in a personal setting. So it's just a reflection on what happened. What did I do to solve it? Did I do anything about it? How did it get resolved? It's a good question to ask. And then what did I learn from this? And one of the reasons I want to mention this in the walkthrough, as opposed to maybe some other notes that I'm not going to go through, is because a postmortem allows you to keep a record of lessons. And I think that's one of the major values here, is that when you reflect later, you can go through lessons you've learned. And it's again a prompt for asking yourself, did I apply this lesson? Did this lesson stick? And is this something I can use in the future? The particular postmortem, that is this something I can use in the future to help me prevent similar cases? Or maybe can I share this particular postmortem with a friend or someone else, right? If someone or a teammate or whatever is going through a problem that you've exactly had and you've done a postmortem about it, you can share that. So this is one of the reasons I keep this template. As you can see, it's very simple, and I think it's very important, especially in the postmortems case, as opposed to a reflection, like a weekly reflection, which can be long because it's something you personally take time for. A postmortem is something that can be quite small. It should be very low in friction and should go very fast. So that's why it's only 3 actual topics. Another note I would like to go through is my decision journal. This is something I got from Atomic Habits. A decision journal is super, super, super handy. I definitely recommend you to keep one for yourself. I think overall it's very up to you to decide how you want to use it. I have to admit I haven't used it very often, so it's still like in a raw form. I think I can optimize it a little bit. You can also see that I haven't actually added emojis yet. Usually I need a couple of iterations before I add emojis. But yeah, a decision journal is a great way, similar to postmortem actually, but then pre-decision, to think about what the decision will include in terms of consequences, what your current state is. So you have to be kind of rational, right, when you make really important and big decisions. And I personally believe that it's quite hard to do so. So having kind of a template, a thinking tool to allow you to make more rational decisions is a really big advantage in this day and age. You can go through many decision journals online. I think there's quite some potential like templates, and you can probably find some things on Reddit. Myself, I currently focus right now mostly on trying this out. So it's for me an experiment, but I've noticed that it really, really helps for big decisions. So small decisions, absolutely not. But when they are impactful decisions, it's quite helpful to kind of put your words on paper. I'm noticing that it also happens in my reflections. So I'll probably kind of make this decision journal quite minimal because I'm noticing that my weekly reflections help me deal with big decisions. But having a structured way to answer yourself questions before you make a big decision is super handy as well. And this is really kind of the essence of templated thinking, is you have these questions that you formulate initially, right? Then you do this decision journal for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times, and then you start to change the question for yourself. And if you are able to integrate a second brain and templated thinking into your life in a frictionless way, then at some point you'll find that the questions that you ask yourself are very personal and they are very properly tailored to your own weak spots. And this is why a second brain can be so useful. It is something external to you that you can optimize that allows you to become efficient based on feedback that you gather on your own. So it increases your self-understanding because you have to reformulate questions based on your weak points or your strengths. But it also allows you to compensate for some of the weak points because you have these questions that help you think about them harder. And this is really kind of the trick of templated thinking. So the next one I want to go through for the people that are interested in training, it is the Mesocycle template. The Mesocycle template is something that I use to structure my trainings in. I can actually walk you through an actual Mesocycle template that I created. So for example, this is the one that I used this year from week 1 to week 4. So it's a 4-week program. A Mesocycle is basically a 4 to 5 week program. It's just a term used in strength training or in fitness, and I personally like to stick to the terminology. As you can see, I like to do templated thinking for things that are related to my goals. So in this case, it's my becoming a decent calisthenics athlete. I've already been doing calisthenics for a few years, and I personally really like to challenge myself to do a lot with mobility and strength. I come from a martial arts background originally when I was young. Nothing professional, but it definitely gets your body into a more tight and explosive state. And when you do strength training, especially in the way that I personally am also trained to do it, so I work with a trainer, you develop a way to use your body that is more elegant, I think, and also definitely better for aging. It's also more healthy, just the things like hip mobility and all things like this. So my Mesocycle template in this case is focused on a couple of goals. I'm not good at muscle ups at all, so I started doing them with band assistance. I mainly focus on a front lever. If anyone knows what that is, it's a different exercise that you also use your upper back for. And yeah, some other goals that I set for this particular program. I have some measurement exercises. So at the end of the Mesocycle, I'll do some measurement to see if I've improved. And these are the ones that I want to focus on. So I'll also keep this in mind. And the reason I use this template particularly is because when I start training, I do not have my goals top of mind. I might be just out of work. It might be in the afternoon. I'm actually just trying to push a training in for 1 or 2 hours and then get back to work immediately. I might even be checking my phone often because I'll get a few messages, and I try to take that advantage because I'm more distracted anyways, and I have to be online in that case. So it is a good advantage to be able to pick up my phone while I'm training, trying to keep my focus still, but not actually doing it while I'm working because then I really want to be focused. So in that point, my mind's somewhere else, and I think it's really handy if you can prompt yourself again with the goals that you have and the things that you find important when you're starting on a task. Again, this is kind of the templated thinking approach, right? So I also describe my focus, and I also describe my focus exercises for every Mesocycle. And that means that when I really do not feel like doing the structured side of my template, so for example, I'm here at day 1 and I really think like, no, I don't feel like it. I'm either too tired or I just don't feel the inspiration, but I do want to train. Well, then what I'll do is I'll say, okay, fuck it. I'm just going to go and do my focus exercises or something around this. And it tells me what I want to focus on. So it allows me to kind of set a specific range for the exercises that I allow myself to do outside of the training program. So it still adds to progress, but I'm not like pushing too hard because that will drain me mentally if I force even more willpower basically in that moment to make myself do the training. And that will reduce the effectiveness of the rest of my day. So the next template I want to focus on is the meeting template. The meeting template is very, very low in structure. I'm just going to create one for you right here. So we're going to create a test meeting. And this is usually the friction it costs me to set it up. It's a few seconds, could be better. The problem that I have is that it's still 2 commands, so I have to first create the node and then include the template. I haven't really spent a lot of time on looking into how I can improve that, but it's definitely one of the first things I want to improve. I definitely feel that friction in my usage a lot. Actually, there is an option in Obsidian to create a new node like this. It's just Command N, but then it actually doesn't allow you to create that node based on a default template. So that's kind of the problem. You have to select the template then afterwards, as I did just now. So here I have the date. That's also from the templater plugin that I showed you in the beginning of this walkthrough. Quite convenient because it's linked yet again to my daily note, and that allows me to collect all my meeting notes and also see basically the whole structure of the way I spend my time, right? Because every note is linked to a particular day. So that means that if I do a weekly reflection, I can see for one day, particularly what meetings I had. I can also see what Zettelkasten notes I added, but I can also see other notes, like any kind of note basically that I added. So what this allows you to do is you can really like zoom in. So for example, if I look back at 2021 from 2022 in the future, then I'll look at my weeks, then I'll look at my days, and then I can actually look at my meetings. And this is kind of a nice structured way through your graph view to then navigate through your second brain. Because of course, if you keep doing this, it expands so heavily that it's going to be hard to search through, and that's where the graph view really comes in. So using the graph view in like a convenient way is kind of key, I think, to keeping a good structure. Right, so in this case, the meeting note is very simple. Because a meeting could go really into all kinds of directions. It's so hard. Sometimes a meeting is full of notes because it's very structured. Sometimes it's just abstract and you end up with mainly action points. So that's why I try to keep it very simple. When the meeting starts, I'll have an agenda. Sometimes I don't have an agenda when the meeting starts because we just have one topic to discuss. And then I'll just, add the topic here like a topic. And then we go into the actual topics discussed. And this is the reason I chose this particular structure. Because the agenda you set barely ever really covers all the topics that you discuss in a meeting. There's always unforeseen topics. So that's why the agenda should be the starting point, in my opinion. And we also use something similar in our working environment. So the agenda should be the starting point, and topics should be the whole list of things that you actually discuss during the meeting. And then there's action points. So at the end of the meeting, you can go through everything you discussed and you can write down the action points, or you can write them down while you have the meeting. So this is also kind of the structure that you go through during the meeting, and that I think really helps. I think overall, it's really handy to be mindful of the amount of mental bandwidth you have. So the amount of attention you can spend on a particular thing while doing it, of course. So when keeping notes of a meeting, I think it's good to be aware of the fact that you're also trying to have the actual meeting. For me, it's quite hard to do the context switching between note taking and doing the actual meeting. And that's why I try to keep this as simple as possible. And I'll mostly work in the topics section. I'll write down some keywords, and then at the end of the meeting, I'll try to spend some time on making sure that this is actually properly expanded on. And the cool thing is you can also link this to the workbench, right? So if at some point you decide like, oh man, I'm not going to have time to actually spend on this meeting note because maybe I have another appointment, or I really want to dive into this particular thing that I was working on before the meeting and you want to get back into it, well, you can postpone this and just add this to your workbench node. And that is where it really becomes convenient. So when I do my shortcut for adding it to the workbench, I'll have this, and boom, it's in my workbench node. And the cool thing now is I can go to my workbench node, and here's my test meeting. And this is convenient because then I can walk through this and I'll see my workbench in my node of tomorrow. Right. This is everything I had in mind to do in this walkthrough. I hope some of it, if not all of it, is useful. If you have any questions or anything was vague, just let us know in the comments. We're super happy to help you. We're definitely keen on expanding on the amount of second brain and Obsidian tutorials and whatnot we do. One question to all of you, any person that's watching, if you are enthusiastic about walkthroughs of other tools that we are using, personally, I'm very interested and very happy about some of the productivity tools I use. I've discovered a few new ones lately, etc. If you're interested on getting walkthroughs of some of these tools, please let us know in the comments, because then we know that this is something that is actually valuable to you guys, and then we'll spend time on doing it. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day, and definitely let us know if there's anything else you want us to cover or you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.